Hello, YouTube, Mr. Max here. One of the most important aspects of any given Pokemon trainer is the team of Pokemon they choose to have. Some trainers have a team of really cool Pokemon that fit them well, fit the theme they're going for very well, and are just a very strong and solid roadblock for the trainer at that point in the game. And some other trainers are not. Some just have really disappointing teams, are not really that powerful or memorable. They don't really fit their personality or fit even really fit the region that they are in. And just kind of leave the player feeling disappointed after fighting them. So today I want to spotlight some of those trainers that I find a little disappointing. And I'll do that by going over my top 30 least favorite Pokemon trainers of all time. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my presentation. Okay, so here is my list of the top 30 least favorite Pokemon trainer teams. Now, full disclosure, when seeking to make this video, I originally had it in my head to just do a simple top 10 least favorite trainer teams. But then I realized that there were a lot more that I wanted to talk about. So maybe I'll do a top 20 with some honorable mentions. And then I had like 11 honorable mentions. So I just decided to do a top 30 because I have just a lot of things to talk about for a lot of different trainers. So let's get right into the criteria for what I'll be, how I formulated this list. So first and foremost, this is just my own personal opinion. I have gone over, in a lot of different previous videos, gone over a lot of these trainers in the past, various, gym leaders, rivals, champions, villain teams, and just gone over their current teams and how I would personally fix them. So I'll be talking a lot about uh, doing a lot of recap basically of those previous videos. But just know that just like with those previous videos, this is just all my opinion. If at any point I bring up a trainer or a Pokemon that you think, that you think actually is well done or you actually do like them, that's great. I would like to have a discussion about that in the comments. Just know that all of these I personally have major issues with that I want to talk about. And if I don't go super in depth about what I probably did, talk about it more in depth in one of the previous videos, which I'll link the playlist up in the card. And as I kind of alluded to, I'll be only talking about major trainers. That is being gym leaders, villain team leaders, rivals, champions, like important characters that are either important to the story, show up several times throughout your journey, that kind of thing. Not just like random root trainers like, youngster Joey or whatever, like, trainers that like actually kind of matter. And for the rivals specifically, kind of to an extent, the villain team people, I will only be talking about the final team that that trainer has. For example, someone like May, I actually really like her Route 110 team in Emerald. I think, as many people in the speedrunning community agree, that team on that route is actually a pretty strong challenge, and like it actually is a pretty good representation of that point in the game. But her final team, as you'll see in a little bit, I don't like as much. However, kind of on the flip side, someone like Hugh, I actually really like his final team, but if I were just doing, any point of these rivals, his like third and fourth teams is just an Unfezant, a Monkey, and a Shutter, which is very similar to Charon's rival teams. And I've talked about that more in the past as well, but I would, if I were doing any instance of these rivals, that would probably go on here, but I'm not gonna be that granular. I'm just talking about the final time you could fight any of those rivals. And there will only be one instance of each trainer. For example, someone like Bruno, who I've ragged on several times throughout this entire video series, um, I could easily see Bruno showing up on this list at least four different times. But just for simplicity's sake, I'm only gonna put one, essentially the my least favorite version of any given trainer. So like, you know, this isn't the case, but let's say, for example, I don't like Flannery's team. Um, you know, I would put her team from specifically from Ruby and Sapphire, not Emerald, because I do think her Emerald team is a little improved along with her Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire team. Um, I will say specifically her Ruby and Sapphire, not any other iteration. And those will kind of make more sense as we go along. I will specify which version I'm talking about. Okay, so let's jump right into it with my number 30 least favorite Pokemon trainer team, that being Liza and Tate from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. So, Tate and Liza in Ruby and Sapphire is actually a very challenging roadblock, for pretty much any person who's playing through a Gen 3 game. Um, it is only two Pokemon because it is a double battle, and those are inherently a little trickier to go off of. Um, their levels are a lot higher than I feel you typically are, like the trainer is usually at when you get to that point. 42 is a very high step up from the previous gym leader being around 33, I believe. Um, and they're both just very good at what they do individually, especially since you can't hurt them with any ground moves since they levitate. So in Generation 3, they were a pretty solid challenge. It doesn't help the fact that a lot of their weaknesses are special attacks, um, grass, water, dark, etc. And since their main thing is using Calm Mind, it can just be hard to take them down once they get set up if you let them set up. And then in Pokemon Emerald, they got a lot better, adding Xatu and Claydol, which means just more Pokemon to deal with, more strategies you have to work around. So that is honestly one of my all-time favorite fights, their Emerald fight. So when Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were coming out, I was really hoping that they would make their Emerald team the team that you fight, or really something similar to that, their team in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. And they didn't do that. Instead, they just go back to having Lunatone and Solrock. They are slightly stronger. I think they're both at 45 now, so that at least kind of keeps up with how fast your team can level up, with how the experience share works in that game, and just experience gaining in general works in that generation. But Tate and Liza, or Liza and Tate, I was there, what they're talking about in that game, because there's just so many more moves available. There's so many incredibly powerful steel, dark, water, grass, especially moves now in this game. The physical and special split makes it so that water and dark moves can now hit them physically, like Grunt before wouldn't necessarily take down Lunatone in one hit if it sets up Calm Minds, but now there's a higher chance that it can. Um, the Pokemon available are just stronger now. Especially now that Mega Evolutions are available. It just all of that together made when I finally got to Tate or Liza and Tate in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, it just made that fight feel very underwhelming, especially compared to how they were originally in Ruby and Sapphire. Because now when I get to them, I can essentially if I can't, one shot, then two shot at the most each Pokemon, and it just felt a little underwhelming. So not the biggest deal. I If they didn't up their levels to 45, if they stayed at 42, they would honestly be a little higher up. But it's more so just there was a lot of potential there that I felt, they could have taken from Emerald and you know, just kind of didn't really do. So, yeah, that's why they're at number 30 on this list. Number 29 is Drayden from Pokemon Black and White. I guess technically white or whichever one Drayden, or whatever. Drayden and Iris in the same, so it doesn't really matter which one. I just put Drayden. Um, so Drayden's team specifically, I've always felt a little underwhelming because almost every single trainer in his gym has either a Drudigon and or a fracture. And then when you get to him, he just has a fracture Drudigon and then fractures final evolved form of Haxorus. So not only is just his team a little boring and it's a lot of Pokemon they've already fought in the gym, he also started an unfortunate trend that they kept doing for at least one other generation, and like kind of elements of this were even like further on, where for some reason gym leaders started being capped at only three Pokemon. This will be even more apparent further up the list when we get to the sixth gym, sixth gen, eighth gym leader. But you easily could have had enough Pokemon to give him four Pokemon. Zweilous is right there. If you had to, you could give him two Druddigon or two Fractures. Like it's not ideal, but or just don't make the eighth gym leader a dragon guy. It just leaves him feeling very underwhelming as the eighth gym leader. And then the ramifications of him only having three, they kept that trend in the next generation, making that generation even worse. So, so yeah, overall, it's definitely not the worst, especially since Gen 5 didn't have too many dragon type options, although it did have one major one they didn't use. But regardless, that Haxorus is still a very strong threat. So it's not the biggest disappointment, but it definitely is, especially, since it did start that trend for at least one generation more. That's why it's on here. Number 28, Hassel. This is specifically Hassel's final post-game rematch in the Blueberry Academy or whatever, like the wherever you fight him in like the final fight. He has one rematch team that you fight during the Ace, like the like school Ace tournament thing. And then he has this team that after he beat the Blueberry Academy, he'll show up with this team. And on paper, it's a pretty solid team of six good, strong dragon types. So you might be thinking, what's the issue here? For no reason, I'm going to show you Drayton's team. And maybe you've noticed it, but just to further clarify my point, I'm going to show you another slide where I have rearranged Drayton's team to showcase that Drayton in his Elite Four team in the Blueberry Academy, he uses an Archaludon, a Dragonite, and a Haxorus. And then after you fight him, you fight Hassel with a Duraludon, a Dragonite, and a Haxorus. Even though Hassel had a Flapple in his two previous fights, they took that away and gave him a Duraludon. I don't know why they did that. Like, I already had beef with Drayton using Haxorus already, since that was already a repeat of Hassel, and then uh, Hassel also had a Dragonite in his rematch fight, and then I also gave one to Drayton, but at least it was only two and not three. But then they randomly switched out Flapple, who I really liked on his team, for a Duraludon, just cementing him as now officially like a significantly worse trainer than Drayton. It just made Hassel, who's this character I actually really liked, I really liked his team in like obviously it is definitely missing a Cyclozar, but outside of that, I think it was a pretty solid team. It just kind of makes his team feel very underwhelming and boring because now half his team is the same evolutionary line as Drayton's team. So not only did I already have an issue with the Blueberry Academy also having a Dragon Elite Four, not only did I also have an issue with him having two Pokemon that were the same, they then added a third one that is also the same. So yeah, I didn't love that. But I can't really like say that this is Hassel's fault. I don't really know, like, I don't know. I just feel like there were a lot of other dragons they should have picked from, or even just keep his Flapple and raise his team levels. So moving on. Number 27, we have the one trainer that kind of broke the rules of major trainers. Yucine is a named character who is kind of important to the plot of Crystal. But in those games, you only fight him the one time. So he's like, I guess he's kind of a important character to those stories. But the reason why he's on this list is this is specifically his Heart Gold and Soul Silver team, which I personally feel would have been their opportunity to make him more of an important character. And instead, they didn't do that. They kept his team Drowsy, Haunter, Electrode. So not only did they make Suicune, kind of have his own little subplot and you still see Eusine throughout, they kept his team of three Kanto Pokemon who you fight over to a team you fight in Johto exactly the same. And also, Haunter is so overused. Even Electro, at that point, you see several of them. Yeah, kind of throughout. Like at least Drowsy isn't like that overused by that point in Pokemon at that point, but there are so many other Generation 2 Pokemon he could and should have had that he didn't in favor of a Drowsy, a Haunter, and an Electrode. Especially that Haunter, where you fought four Pokemon in that line on on Morty's team. You fought three of them on Agatha's team. You fight one, several times on Silver's team, then you fight one again on Carrot's team. So instead of doing any of the various Pokemon, like Slowking or Girafarig or Lantern or Ampharos or Granbull or Stantler. I could keep going. Sunflora. Like there are so many Pokemon that not all of those would necessarily fit him perfectly, but I feel they would give him more of a personality than what they're doing here. At least represent the region of Johto a little more. And if this is the team that he starts with, and right before you actually have a chance to fight Suicune, he shows up and you fight him again. He has, five or six Pokemon, and he added a couple of Johto Pokemon on. I'd be a little more forgiving. No, because this is the team that he has, the one and only time you fight him in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and they didn't change his team at all. That just really annoys me. He can't be much higher because his character doesn't really matter, and this is technically an optional fight. So even though I don't like it in the slightest, it doesn't really matter to the grander story if it were better. So moving on. Number 26, Lance. A part of me actually kind of likes the fact that it's all flying types. At least there's that going for it. The three that aren't dragon types are draconic flying types, so that's kind of cool. But I feel he easily could have you know, traded out those two Dragonites for something else. Even I know that Kingdra was Claire's ace, but who cares? Lance is better than Claire, so I feel like maybe he could have a Kingdra. I floated out in a previous video that he should have had a Feraligatr, so he could have both the Johto and Kanto starter Pokemon. They're both kind of draconic in the same way that Gyarados is. I just think there was a lot of options. Tyranitar, especially since Karen didn't use one, he should have had a Tyranitar because there were so many different other options for draconic or even dragon type Pokemon that he didn't use in favor of three underpowered dragon type Dragonites. That just always really irked me. Number 25, we have every single Team Magma and Aqua admin character from Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. I talked about this extensively in my analyzing every villain team video, but for some reason, In Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, they reduced the number of Pokemon that all these admins use down to a single Pokemon, that being either a Sharpedo or a Camerupt. And then they gave Matt and Courtney the Megas. I don't know why. I feel their teams definitely needed a revamp, but they didn't need to have fewer Pokemon. They needed to have more water and then ground and or fire Pokemon. No, instead their one Pokemon they have is just the ace of their team leader. So by the time you fight the team leader again, his Sharpedo or Camera Up doesn't feel special anymore. So it's not the biggest deal. It, I'm never gonna like care as much about the admins than I do the like actual team leaders. But it is still very disappointing. Like, when you get to the Weather Institute and you fight Shelly there and it's just a Sharpedo. I remember the first time I played Alpha Sapphire and I got there and it was just a Sharpedo. I felt like I was missing something because why is it just Sharpedo? Why did she have Mightyena or Golbat or any other water type she could have had? But yeah, that always annoyed me a little bit. Originally I thought about putting them on four different points, but like no, they all have the same general issue and they all fill basically the same role. So I just put them all in this one spot here. Number 24, we have Norman from Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. So I really like this Vigoroth and the Slakoth on the same team, showcasing how both have merit, both can be very strong in their own way. But having two Slacking, that always irritated me a lot, especially in Gen 3, where there are a ton of really cool normal types you could have picked from. You got Zangoose, Linoon, even Swellow, I think, could have fit here. Loudred. There's just several other, Spinda from his Emerald team. There were several other normal types he could have used. Instead, it's just all Pokemon from the same evolutionary line. If it was Zangoose, Vigoroth, Slacking, that would be perfect. Or Loudred, amazing. But yeah, I think even Loudred would kind of still fit the same vibe as Vigoroth, where it's at least harder to put him to sleep since you can't use Sing on it. Um, or and also it uses up like all three can use Uproar. I think that would have been fun, but instead you just kind of have to. It just ends up being a little monotonous to fight one Slaking. Take your time beating that one down, then fighting Vigoroth, and fighting another Slaking. So that was always a little irritating. And I am going to be judging remakes that don't fix problems a little harsher than the original games. Uh, especially in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, like I said with Tate and Liza, where just since power creep has increased so much, there's a lot more ways to deal with slacking. I just would have liked a little more variety in his team. Now that you're 3 generations later, there's a lot more ways to deal with slacking, and I don't know. I just feel like you could have done a lot more with this team in this remake. Number 23, we have Bea and Alistair from Sword and Shield. Similar with the Magma and Aqua admins, they both have very similar issues, so I kind of put them both on the same spot here. Um, I've talked in length in previous videos about how I absolutely despise the fact that they just throw Machamp and Gengar on any fighting and ghost specialist they can, or even for Gengar's sake, any kind of spooky adjacent character team. And I thought they were doing pretty good for a while, but then no, they brought back Machamp and Gengar as their ace Pokemon in the Galar region. And for Bea specifically, there were at least two other very solid fighting type Pokemon that she just didn't use, those being Phalanx and uh Grapploct. And Alistair could use Poltegeist. I feel he, especially compared to Bea's team, he should have had Cofagrigus, not Cofagrigus, Runerigus. Like, it just kind of makes them feel like they're not even from this region if the only Pokemon that they do have that are from this region are just regional variant forms or evolutions. It just I don't know. I just really don't like how they just defaulted to giving them Machamp and Gengar when those two Pokemon have been aces of so many, or at least on the teams of so many other trainers. And I'll talk about them more throughout. Yeah, and those two, I went way more in depth in my gym leader video how I would fix them. But the primary way I would fix them is just take away Machamp and Gengar and give them a Galar Pokemon as their ace. Number 22, another entry where we have multiple spots here. Every single Kalos Elite Four member. I laid into this entire Elite Four in my fixing the Elite Four members video, where it irks me so much to this day where they are all they're all on the same level. You can find them in any order, but and they're all the strongest level wise that any Elite Four has ever been. Yet none of them have a single Mega Evolution in the region that Mega Evolutions was introduced in. Why? There's at least one option for every single type here. Not to mention, on top of just not having a Mega Evolution, why do they all have two Gen 6 Pokemon and then two non-Gen 6 Pokemon? For a lot of these, there are other options they could have used. It just it just kind of makes them feel underwhelming when you fight four, only four Pokemon. And there doesn't really have that any one Pokemon in this entire set here that just has that oof that I really like Elite Four members to have. Just having a Mega Pokemon on all of these teams would have really helped with that. But for some reason, Gen 6 just decided to not give pretty much any trainers Mega Evolutions. There was like four maybe throughout the entire game. And I really think this should have had at least four more here. Number 21, Chuck. Now, Chuck, the problems I have with Chuck are more so problems I have with him in tandem to how they handled Bruno. Um, because in theory, I kind of like the fact that Chuck has the two fighting types they didn't give Bruno in Red and Blue. However, that shouldn't really be a problem that this should have to solve because they should have just given Bruno a Primeape and a Poliwrath in the first place instead of those two Onyx for some reason. Um, so even though I do like the fact that he has these two Pokemon that Bruno didn't use, that shouldn't be points in his favor. He should have a Heracross, but he doesn't have a Heracross. But Bruno in Heart Gold, or yeah, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, but also Gold and Silver, also doesn't have a Heracross. So I would be totally fine with this team if one of them had a Heracross, but because neither have a Heracross, and also Bugsy doesn't have a Heracross, it just leaves this team feeling very lacking and not representative of the region in the slightest. And I'll lay into Bruno a lot more later. But if they had just added a Heracross here or on Bruno's team in any of the Jin or any of the Johto games, I would have liked it a lot better. But especially in conjunction with Bruno, not really a fan. Okay, now into the top 20, we have Charon's team from Black and White 2. Now, already Lillipup does not scream ace material in the slightest. Not only does Lillipup not scream ace material, it's weird that on the rival teams in Black and White, it was actually Bianca that had the Stoutland, not Charon. Yet now Charon is the normal gym leader with a Lillipup. That seems a little weird. What's even weirder is the fact that not only are these two Pokemon just the same evolutionary line as Lenora from Black and White, both of the junior trainers in his gym use Patrat and Lillipup. They're on level 9, so they're at least a lot weaker, but it's still just the same two Pokemon. Even though there are a ton of other normal types in the Black and White 2 decks they could have pulled from. Minccino, Audino, Pidove, there's, Rattata now. There's like a bunch of different normal types in that gen that they could have pulled from. And instead, they just gave him a Lillipup. A Lillipup who was the starting Pokemon of the first gym from Black and White. Silin and Cress and Silent, no, Chili, Silent, and Crest, yeah, they all started with Lillipup and then used their monkey. So Lillipup, even just as itself, isn't special on a gym leader team from the same region. So I really don't know why they didn't switch one of these around or especially Lillipup, for any other normal type. You can, like I said, with Minccino, it can be another single state normal type. I just wish it wasn't one that was fought so often in those games. All right, next up, number 19, we have Archer, the leader of Team Rocket from the Johto games. I like him with Houndoom. I think that's a very solid Team Rocket Pokemon. However, I don't like him having Houndour and Houndoom. I think there are a lot of other dark and or fire types that could have pulled from. And then Coughing is just the Pokemon that they just kind of threw on any of these Team Rocket admins. Like we have six of them on Petrol's team, and then another one on Proton's team. It just by the time you get to this team, it just feels very boring to fight these Pokemon. And then because Houndoom is here, it kind of retroactively makes Karen feel worse because her ace is also Houndoom, even though you've already had to deal with the Houndoom before. So yeah, I can't really like knock points from him because yeah, Karen uses the same ace, but it kind of like with Chuck, kind of in tandem, it kind of makes them both feel a little less impressive. So if Coughing was something else, if Houndour was something else, or if you even had four Pokemon they added, again, any of the other Gen 2 Pokemon like with Ucine, in my fixed video, I floated out giving him a Grand Bowl to kind of keep with his dog aesthetic, especially since that Pokemon would use nowhere else. Yeah, it would have been cool, but whatever. Sticking with Team Rocket, this one is on here more so just out of confusion more than anything. For some bizarre reason, Giovanni's Leaf Green and Fire Red gym leader fight has him have a Rhyhorn, Dugtrio, Nidoqueen, Nidoking, and a second Rhyhorn. In every other instance of this fight, he has a Rhydon. Red, blue, and yellow, he has a Rhydon. Yet for some reason, in Leaf Green Fire Red, it's a second Rhyhorn. And I don't understand that. I Is it a coding error? Is it for some kind of balancing reason? I don't know. Like I want to know who I could ask to pick their brain to find out why this happened, because it's just confusing. I remember the first time I played Leaf Green back in like 2005, whenever it was, I got to Giovanni, because I had played Yellow before that. I got to Giovanni expecting, to fight a Rhydon. Not that Rhydon would be like super strong, especially since it had an Articuno and a Blastoise, but he threw out a second Rhyhorn, and I was just very confused. I don't know. Um, yeah, like it's not the worst team on this entire list, but it definitely is a very confusing choice. So, yeah, I wonder if anyone else has any information about why this is the Rhyhorn. Has anyone at the Pokemon Company or Game Freak or anywhere said anything about this? I'm curious. Moving on. Blaine. This team sucks. I, I'm going to be talking about several more Generation 1 gym leaders here, where even though there's a plethora of their type specialty they could have picked from, they just have a bunch of repeats for no reason. Growlithe and Arcanine, Ponyta and Rapidash. Where's Magmar? Where's Ninetales? Where's Flareon? Like there's a lot of options they could have gone with. And instead, it's just feels very boring by the end of it. Like, especially since a lot of his junior trainers have Ponyta and Growlithe, and that's his entire team. I don't know. I don't know why they did that. But speaking of Generation 1 gym leaders that I don't know why they did that, Misty. Um, I just dogged on Blaine for having repeats of fire types. At least in his case, there's not that many other options to pick from. There's definitely enough to, so he doesn't have to use repeats, but like there's not, 17 other options to pick from. Unlike with Misty, she has a star you and a star me. Not a seal or a shelter or a horsey or a goldeen or a tentacle or a magikarp. I could probably keep going. I'm sure I forgot about Poliwag, Krabby. I'm sure I even still forgot about some. But there are so many water types that she could have picked from. And instead, she had Staryu and Starmie. If it was Staryu, Goldeen, Starmie, I'd be a little more forgiving. You still shouldn't have repeats, but at least it's not just the same evolutionary line. I really don't know why they did that. That's always really bugged me. So I'm glad they finally fixed that. Oh, Psyduck. Yeah, they gave her a Psyduck, I believe, in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So I appreciate them fixing it there. But for, you know, decades, her first team was always Staryu and Starmie. So that's weird. Anyway, moving on to number 15, another Kanto gym leader. Um, in a very similar vein to Misty, there are a ton of poison type Pokemon that Koga could have picked from. At least his team has two evolutionary lines, but it's coughing, coughing, muck, wheezing. And if you want to like go even deeper, his yellow team is three Venonats and a Venomoth. So across both of his Generation 1 teams, he has a total of three evolutionary lines and only five total Pokemon. Even though there are several other poison types he could have picked from. Tentacruel, Golbat, Arbok, either the Nidos, even Victory Bell, Gloom. Like obviously some of these were used on other trainers, but the point is that there are so many other poison types he could have picked from that he just didn't. Even if this team specifically was just coughing, muck, Venomoth, wheezing, that would have been a lot better. And I guess I appreciate them mixing it up a little bit with his yellow team, but it's the same problem, if not actually a bigger issue now that it's only two Pokemon, both in the same evolutionary line. So in yellow, when you're fighting him, you fight three Venonat in a row, and like maybe they know a different move here and there, but they all basically do the same thing. It just feels very monotonous. Next up, Karen. I kind of alluded to this earlier. But her team is very disappointing. Um, I talked about this in my Elite Four video. Her team, by the time you get to it, by the time you fight her in the Elite Four, her team just feels very much like you fought it before. Vileplume and Murkrow are both on Ariana's team. Gengar is everywhere. Houndoom is on Archer's team, and you fought an Umbreon before at the with the Kimono Girls. I'm fine with her having Umbreon, Houndoom, and Murkrow since those are, three dark types from Johto. But considering that there are exactly five dark types in Johto, I feel that she should have the five dark types from Johto. Her and then also Lance not having Tyranitar is a major crime. And I don't know why they just didn't use Tyranitar anywhere in the entire game. No trainer. Gun to my head, I couldn't tell you confidently that if you didn't know that Larvitar or anyone that line existed, I don't think you ever would fight one on a single trainer team without the entire either region. Like there might be one single trainer somewhere with the Larvitar or something, but I played through Heart Gold recently and I really don't think there was. If Karen or Lance had used that Tyranitar, that would have definitely helped. But the way it is right now, only three of her Pokemon are dark, and the other two are just random poison types. And I don't really know why they go here. Number 13, Wolfric. This was what I was alluding to before when I talked about Drayden, where Drayden started the trend of the eighth gym leader only having three Pokemon, but Wolfric took that to an extreme that just was absolutely disappointing. Why doesn't he have a Mega Abomasnow? He is the strongest gym leader that we've ever had. I believe it's either his highest Pokemon is level 58. He should have a Mega Abomasnow. The way the leveling works in the game, especially since you have the experience share, the way it works in that game, like you can match, if not exceed his level by that point in those games. You have access to Mega Evolutions. So I feel like after you beat Lysander, every other major trainer should have a Mega Evolution. But no, just a regular Abomasnow. And then Cryogonal, it doesn't really seem to fit him all that well, I think. I personally would have gone with Vanillux and or Mamoswine. In fact, why does he only have three Pokemon? Like Vanillux and or Mamoswine would have fit on here so nicely. You can even keep Cryogonal and just add one other, but having at least four Pokemon, I don't know why after Gen 3, they were just allergic to giving the eighth gym leader four Pokemon or more than four Pokemon. There have only been two generations where they had five Pokemon, those being Generation 1 with Giovanni and then Generation 3 with Wallace and Juan. No other eighth gym leader has ever had more than four Pokemon, with, as you can see here, several of them having only two or three. Several of them only having three. So it's just really disappointing. It's just one of those things that makes me, you know, just not think very fondly about Generation 6 because it just makes those games feel so much easier than they should be. The trainer's given all these tools to actually, just steamroll the game with zero roadblocks. Wolfric could have at least had some kind of, could have had something that would have made him a little stronger. Instead, he's just a trainer you have to fight and beat easily. And then same thing with the Elite Four. They're just kind of there because none of them have Mega Evolutions. Okay, number 12, we have May from Pokemon Emerald. I'm picking the Emerald team specifically because it's just so weird that Emerald had the opportunity to fix the problem that was there in Ruby and Sapphire, where she only had four Pokemon and her final team didn't even use a fully evolved starter Pokemon. And then this team didn't fix that. Um, and truthfully, my like least favorite May team would be this one here with Grovyle, because at least in this instance, if you switch out Slugma for the Combuskin, that's at least better than Slugma, whereas Ludicolo has a way higher base stat total than Grovyle, so it just makes her feel a lot weaker overall. Like I kind of like Pelipper here, um, but Pelipper and Tropius together just have her have a lot of Pokemon that are also on my Nona's team, so that's a little odd. But you really should have been able to fight her one other time, either at Evergrande City or some kind of post-game fight where she had at least five Pokemon, but at the very least, have that be a fully evolved starter Pokemon. And I don't know why they never let you fight the rival from Gen 3 with a fully evolved starter. In fact, this fight right here with the Ludicolo, that's actually an optional fight that you don't have to do. So really, the last canon fight with her is just a Slugma, Pelipper, and a Lombre, and then switch out whatever for the starter Pokemon. So that's just so disappointing. And at least Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire let you fight her a final time with a fully evolved Mega Evolved starter. Like her only having a team of five is a little disappointing, but at least they fixed that problem, whereas Emerald did not. So yeah, this team here with a Grovyle is my least favorite iteration of May. Now, for number 10, we have, oh, sorry, 11, Bugsy. Um, oh boy. Bugsy, I don't know why they decided to make it where across the first two gym leaders in Johto, there are five Pokemon, and none of them are Johto Pokemon. In fact, across the first five gym leaders, there's only one Johto Pokemon. It's not like there aren't other bug types to pick from. There are several bug types. Like you have a pretty good opportunity to find a Spinarak and or a Ladybug, depending on the game you have. You find Paris in the forest next door. You can headbutt to find a Heracross. Obviously, Yanma's available. Like there are Pineco. There's a lot of other bug types from Johto they could have picked here. At least Scyther evolves into Scizor, who is a Johto Pokemon, so I give that kind of a half pass. If Kakuna, or preferably both, if Kakuna and Metapod were both Gen 2 Pokemon, I honestly wouldn't really care that much about Scyther, especially since Scyther wasn't on any major teams in Generation 1. But because they're just a bunch of Kanto Pokemon in a region where there's a lot of bug types to pick from, I never liked this team. At least they did something kind of fun in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where he starts with Scyther, and his whole thing is that focus energies and like U-turns out and hits you very hard, and um, so you like any opportunity to try to like leer it or sand attack it don't really work because it just keeps like switching out. Not that Metapod or Kakuna can really like do much to you in the meantime, but it's much harder to take down Scyther in those games because you can't really like build up debuffs on it until you finally get it back out after beating the other two. So in that instance, they kind of use the fact that Kakuna and Metapod are kind of trash, kind of filler Pokemon to its advantage. But you easily could have had those be like a Ladybug, a Yanma, or a Spinarak, or whatever, other bug type, and would have filled a similar role. Okay, moving on to the top 10. In order to be in the top 10, you have to make me genuinely frustrated. I may have had some harsh words for a lot of the other ones on here, but like, I don't hate those nearly as much as I do the next 10, the 10 trainers here. So, number 10 is one that I've kind of alluded to a couple of times here, Bruno. This is specifically Bruno's rematch team from Leaf Green Fire Red. In Leaf Green Fire Red, when you rematched the Elite Four, for all four of them, they switched out one of their Pokemon for a type specific Gen 2 Pokemon. Lorelei, they gave her a Piloswine. Um, uh, let's see. Agatha, they gave her a Mischievous, and then Lance, they gave him a Kingdra. For Bruno, all they did was they just evolved both of his Onix into Steelix. He didn't think to switch out one of those Steelix for a Hitmontop to at least kind of parallel his Gen 2 Elite Four team. That would have been cool. Essentially just make his rematch team his team that he starts with in the Johto games. Hitmontop, Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, Onix, Machamp. That would have been cool. I'm even fine with him since if he has to have Steelix for whatever reason, or if he has to have an Onyx, Onyx line Pokemon, Hitmontop and Steelix would have been fine enough. But no, they didn't do that. They just doubled down on him having two Steelix. At least they gave Blue a Heracross in his champion rematch. So Heracross is somewhere. Ideally, it would be on Bruno's team where, it would make sense on a fighting specialist. But regardless, because Heracross is on Blues team, I'm not as mad about Heracross not being here. I'm more so mad about this just being indicative of the greater Bruno issue of Bruno in almost every single instance of fighting him outside of the Heart Gold and Soul Silver rematch. He has someone in the Onyx line. At least in that rematch, they took that away and actually have him have a bunch of fighting types. So at least they finally fixed it there that one time. And then in uh, Let's Go, they at least took away one Onyx and gave him a Poliwrath, but still had another Onyx. But at least it's an improvement. Whereas here, them choosing to double down on him having two non-fighting types, that's just a little disappointing, especially when they fixed Lorelei. I believe, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong about which one they switched out, but I'm pretty sure they switched out her Slowbro for a Piloswine. So they nailed her down as a ice Elite Four member. Same thing with Agatha, where I maybe it was the Haunter they switched out, but regardless, them adding another ghost type to her team, that's neat. But here, the Gen 2 Pokemon they added was a non-fighting type. It's like, oh, that's a little very disappointing. Number nine, Sabrina from Leaf Green Fire Red. Why is there a Venomoth here? Why did you take Koga's Venomoth and put it here? Is this why Koga didn't have a Venomoth? Because they put it here first? Was there a timeline where Venomoth was originally going to be a psychic Pokemon, and then they changed that kind of late in development, but didn't take it off Sabrina's team? If that is the case, then sure, but there's no evidence of anywhere that would indicate that. But even outside of just Venomoth here, Kadabra and Alakazam, when there's a lot of other psychic types it could have picked from, namely either Slowbro, Exeggutor, Hypno. There's other Pokemon they could have picked. At least in Yellow, sorry, I kind of like the Abracadabra Alakazam thing they were going for. That's kind of fun. But here it's just Kadabra and Alakazam, and then Venomoth is not even a psychic type. And because Venomoth is here, it made a lot of people think that it was a psychic type for the longest time. So yeah, I really don't know why why her team was made like this and then stayed like this in Leaf Green Fire Red. Number eight, we have Jasmine. So the way they introduced the new shiny steel type is to give her two Magnemite who are now Steel type, which is cool to showcase that this one Pokemon who wasn't a Steel type is now a Steel type. But two Magnemite and a Steelix. Steelix, cool. It's technically an evolved form from a Gen 1 Pokemon, so like I don't really know how much credit you really give her, although like a good portion of the dex is Gen 1 evolution, so it could either been Steelix or Scythe or Scizor, and it kind of wouldn't have the same feel. But regardless, the problem I have with her is those two Magnemites. A, they're both in level 30. Therefore, they're both fully at the level where they should be evolved into Magneton. Why aren't they Magneton? Even if it was Magnemite, Magneton, Steelix, I would feel a little better about it. It would at least would be a little more of a challenge. But instead, they're just two Magnemite. Two Pokemon that you fight a lot just throughout both regions. You fight several Magnemite and Magneton on Silver's team, and then when you get to Kanto, you fight Lieutenant Surge, who has a Magneton. So I'm more so, as you'll see in just a little bit, I'm more so mad about Silver having Magneton, but regardless, her having two Magnemite, when there are other steel types that could have spotlighted, namely either Fortress and or Skarmory, that's a little annoying. And I really don't know why they wouldn't try and fix that in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Instead, they just kept them the exact same, both in level 30, both still being a Magnemite. This is honestly one of the main reasons why I would really, really want a Let's Go style Johto game, so that way they can overhaul a lot of these teams like they did in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee because they gave Misty a Psyduck. They completely overhauled Blaine's team to give him four different fire types. They could very easily overhaul her team to give her a Magneton and a Skarmory and Steelix. That would be ideal. But the way it is right now, I really don't like it. Another team from Gen 2 that I really don't like, Morty, Ghastly Haunter, Gengar Haunter. Where's Mischievous? Another Pokemon from Johto that if you didn't know it existed, you would never see one. Like if because again, gun to my head, I can't think of a single time at any point in my journey through my recent hard gold version. I'm pretty sure I fought every single trainer you could. I don't remember fighting a single Mischievous. There aren't any in his gym anywhere. They're like they didn't just throw one onto Karen's team. That would have been kind of cool if instead of, because four Pokemon from the Ghastly line are used here, instead of giving Karen a Gengar, they gave her a Misdreavus. That would be at least something. But no, they just use Gengar again. I also don't know why his team is set up like this, where it's Ghastly, Haunter, Gengar, Haunter. That's how it's coded in the game for him to send out Haunter last. I'm not really sure why. But regardless, that last Haunter absolutely should be a Misdreavus. Even if it's not technically his ace, you can have Gengar be his strongest Pokemon, but he definitely should have the one ghost type they added in Generation 2. It's not even an excuse to be like, oh, they just didn't have enough ghost types to really make a good team. They had one other Pokemon that they could have had. I personally would have done like either just level them up and do Gengar Misdreavus or like Haunter Misdreavus Gengar, something like that. But instead, even though Misdreavus is a very, you know, I think a very neat Pokemon. Like I think it's a ghost in a very different way that Gengar is, and also the fact that it's not weak to Psychic would just help him be a little harder to take down, especially in the way that Gen 2 works, since they were still weak to ground. You can't just, spam through him with a normal type using Dig. That's a pretty solid way to deal with him in Generation 1 or Generation 2. But Mischievous isn't weak to ground, whereas all of them are. So, yeah, disappointing. And like I said, I really hope at some point they do some kind of let's go Johto style game to finally give him a Mischievous. At least in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they in his rematch he had a Miss Magius. So that's something, I guess. Number six, speaking of Miss Magius, we have Fantina. This is specifically her Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl rematch team. So a little backstory about this team. In Platinum, you obviously have a chance to rematch every single gym leader, and they cap them all at only five Pokemon. It's not the biggest deal. I would have preferred six, but okay. They all only had five Pokemon. And even though there are at least three other very solid, very strong ghost type Pokemon introduced in Generation 4 that are on her team and easily could be her ace, those being Drifblim, Dusknoir, Magius. They decided in that rematch to make Gengar her ace Pokemon. Even though her dress is literally like an amalgamation of Drifblim and Magius color-wise, she decided to make Gengar her ace Pokemon. Even though Gengar had already been the ace of the two previous ghost specialists. I don't know why they did that. So when Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl came around and they started doing rematches, this was their chance to finally make Miss Maggie as her ace, like it was in her original gym fight, and like it should have been in her rematch. But no, not only did they keep Gengar being her ace, they added a sixth Pokemon, that being Frostlass, and made Frostlass tied on Gengar's level to be dual aces. Even though Frostlass was also on Candace's team, and at this point is pretty heavily associated with Candace, um, they made Frostlass her secondary ace. You couldn't have like I'm more or less fine with Frostlass being here in theory. Ideally, her and Candace wouldn't have any overlap, but like there are at least a couple of other ghost types she could have used. But it's whatever. In a vacuum, it's fine that it is here. However, Miss Magius or Drifblim or Dust Noir, if you for some reason need to switch up who her ace is, one of those three should have been her ace, and instead it's Frostlass and Gengar. Like at least Frostlass is from this region, so they kind of technically fixed the issue I had with Gengar not being from this region. But why not have it be Miss Magius, who is her ace in both Diamond Pearl and Platinum? And then also in her gym fight from Brilliant Diamond Shine and Pearl. I really, my main issue is just Gengar being her ace here. If it was just randomly Frostlass being her ace, I'd be like, okay, that's weird. It used to be Candace's ace, but now they made her ace, either Mamoswine or Weavile or whatever. Um, but now Frostlass is here, whatever. But Gengar also being a dual ace, that is beyond dumb, and I do not like it. Um, so yeah. Moving on to the top five. Now, the top five here kind of like paired together with Wolfric, who I've made peace with over time. These five trainers are essentially completely responsible for wanting me to create this entire video series where I go over every single major trainer and like analyze them and and that kind of thing. Um, all five of these I feel are kind of uniquely bad in just how disappointing I feel, unique in how disappointing their teams are. Starting off with Watson, a Generation 3 trainer with zero Generation 3 Pokemon, an electric type trainer who just uses a bunch of Magnemite again. Now, granted, there aren't that many other electric types you could pull from for Generation 3. Magnetric is pretty much the only other electric type you could pull from, unless you want to give a Mina and Plusle Magnetric. That is possible, but Mina and Plusle don't really work all that well in Gen 3 if they're not in a double battle. So I'd be fine with Magnemite, Voltorb, Magnetric, but instead it's Magnemite, Voltorb, Magneton, a Pokemon that you fight everywhere. If if you get the bike before fighting Watson and you go down Cycling Road, you pretty much every trainer on Cycling Road has either Magnemite and or Voltorb. So you just fight a lot of Pokemon, that are on his team just around the region. There's a there's a guitarist off to the right of Mauville that has two Magnemite. There's several other trainers around the region, just around Mauville even that have Magnemite and Voltorb. So for his ace to then also be someone in the Magnemite line and not a Gen 3 Pokemon just makes him feel just kind of underwhelming. And I'm really upset that they didn't fix that in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. They, for some reason, switched one of Flannery's Slugma out for a Numel, but they didn't do anything to Watson's team. They didn't even switch out Magnemite for an Electric. You could argue, oh, he can't have Magnetric because that would be underleveled, where his Magneton is also underleveled, so that's not really an excuse. Yeah, it's just indicative of one of my major issues I have with the Gen 3 remakes. A part of me really, really likes a lot of things those games did, but also the fact that they kept the vast majority of the teams the same just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So yeah, this is on here specifically because the Gen 3 remakes didn't fix it. Number four is Gita. I've talked about this team probably to death at this point, but I'm going to talk about it again. This team sucks. I'm not the first person to to go in on this, but every single choice they made with this team is a choice that I would do the opposite of. Espathra and Veluza, they have a type overlap there, both being psychic. That's a little unnecessary. Like, I don't know, like you ideally a champion would have as little type overlap as possible unless they have like a specific type specialty. But whatever. That's not the issue I have with them. The issue I have is that Espathra and Veluza were both on previous gym leader teams. They weren't even aces. They're just random Pokemon on those gym leaders. And so for some reason they just decide to throw these random Pokemon that were on previous gym leader teams on her team, even though there are a bunch of other Pokemon from Paldea that are nowhere. Cerulege, Cyclizar, um, Goldingo, Palafin. Any of these would have been very cool to have. And on top of those two being random repeats, we have Go-Goat and Avalugg being two random Gen 6 Pokemon that, like, they're not bad Pokemon. They have pretty high base stat total, but they don't represent anything really about the region. They don't really seem to fit her all that well. I- Like, at least they're two different types, but it's just kind of weird. I don't know, just and then in her rematch they kept the Avalugg. I don't know why they were so keen on her having an Avalugg. I don't know, just those those two were definitely a choice I wouldn't have made. And then King Gambit not being her ace when its ability makes it so that it does more damage when more Pokemon have fainted. In a previous video, I suggested doing you give her a Rabsca who has the move Revival Blessing, which I believe if the mechanic works how I think it does, any Pokemon who are revived during battle can still add to King Gambit's counter. So you can have up to six different, even seven if you give it a Lepa Berry, and then it can use Revival Blessing again. I'll just say six though for simplicity. It can have Supreme Overlord up to, plus six boost. That's cool. But no, it's usually thrown out fifth, which is still not like it's not the worst, but it's not as good as it could be, especially since I feel King Gambit just screams ace material for a champion. And not that Glimora doesn't. It's deceptively very strong, but the fact that its ability is literally designed so that it should be thrown out early into a fight so it can continually set up toxic spikes, and instead is thrown out last where it's almost useless there at the very end. Like, oh yeah, you hit it once, it throws out toxic spikes, and then it'll probably die to another hit or two. So it's really not going to use its ability. So yeah, almost every single individual choice they made on her team, I would consider the wrong choice. There are so many other Pokemon from the region they could have pulled from, and the team just feels very underwhelming, especially as someone who was pitched as the top champion of the region. And when I finally get to her, she throws out in a Spathra. I was like, oh, I've already fought one of those. Maybe this one at least has speed boost. It's hidden ability. No, it doesn't. Oh, okay. If a Spathra, Veluza, and Navlog had their hidden abilities, which are all very good, we'd be we'd be having a different conversation here. But instead, they're all just kind of lame. So she is absolutely one of the worst champion level characters in all of history. Number three is possibly my least favorite rival character in all of history. At least my least favorite rival with a full team of six. There are a couple of others that have like only three Pokemon from Gen 6. I don't really care about them. Like they don't. I don't care enough about those characters or their teams to really irk me in in any like major way. Whereas this team does. This final team from Gold and Silver, and the fact that he technically only has three Pokemon from Johto, for Alligator, Crobat, Sneasel, and then for most of the game it's just a Golbat, which I kind of like the idea of at least one of his Pokemon being a friendship evolution because the entire game is him realizing, the value and worth of his Pokemon. So that's cool to show his growth as a trainer. But I feel ideally, especially since, like I said before, there were so many other Pokemon from Johto that got no love anywhere else. They could have been here. Instead, he has Alakazam and Gengar and Magneton, which are everywhere. I've already talked about Johto Gengars three other times in this list. So, especially considering that Alakazam, the first time you fight him with Kadabra, it's just thrown on there at the very end when you fight him right before the Elite Four. So he had an open slot to fill it with something, Donphan, Ursaring, Stantler, Gramble, anything. No. Skarmory, since it wasn't on Jasmine's team. No. Alakazam. Okay, sure. Not to mention the fact that Magaton and Alakazam are both also on Blue's team from Pokemon Yellow. So a third of his team is repeats from the previous rival. It just it just makes him feel very, very forgettable, I think. And it doesn't help the fact that in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, in those games, there's no way to evolve Magneton for some reason. I feel like you could have done the power plant, or some other location, like be magnetically charged somehow. So he could have at least had a Magnezone, but no, just Magneton. Oh well. Now, number two is Faulkner. Um, this along with Wolfric were kind of the two trainers that got me on the train of thought to start the process of trying to fix every single gym leader from the entire franchise, because it is absolutely crazy that the first gym leader in Johto has two Kanto Pokemon. And not only are there two Kanto Pokemon, they're two Kanto Pokemon from the same line. And not only are there two Kanto Pokemon from the same line, they're two Kanto Pokemon from the same line that you fight everywhere in Kanto. Your rival uses Pidgey and Pidgeotto and Pidgeot throughout. There's so many bird tamers. There's just so many instances of Pidgey and Pidgeotto throughout that region. Then you get to Faulkner here, and he just has a Pidgey and a Pidgeotto. And in Gold and Silver, his Pidgeotto's only on level 9, which is hilarious because a junior trainer in that gym has a Spearow on level 9. You don't want your junior trainers to have Pokemon on the same level as the as the ace of the gym leader, but that's what happened. At least in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they upped their levels a little bit, but they didn't switch Pidgey out for Hoodoo. They didn't switch Pidgeotto out for a Natu or a Murkrow, or any other flying type from Gen 2. No? Okay, okay, whatever. It just, especially this coupled with Bugsy, it just for some reason it's just this weird indication that they did not want to spotlight any of the new Pokemon. They really wanted to make sure that Kanto fans felt comfortable with these games, even though, like, throughout the entire region, like you fight a lot of Pidgey, you fight a lot of Pokemon in the Caterpie line, you fight a lot of a lot of other Pokemon in the Ghastly line. Like we know, like we know that these Pokemon exist. We know that that they're from Kanto. Like we we already fought them before. So can we, at least for these major trainers, I think you easily should have spotlighted these Pokemon from Johto, but instead they just didn't. Okay, so for the longest time, Faulkner was actually my number one. It was between Faulkner and who is number one now, but after discussing it with a couple other people, um, I did realize that, yeah, Faulkner I'm more so disappointed in, because it's more so just this is indicative of a major problem with the Johto games as a whole. Whereas Will, who I'm going to talk about here, Will genuinely makes me angry. This team here is what energized me to continue the process of doing that fixing the gym leaders video, because I've had beef with this team for going on 20 years now at this point. Like, I despise every single aspect of this team. Executor, you can stay, I like you, but every other aspect of this team I do not like in the slightest. So first off, you can have one Zatu. That's fine. Like Xatu is a Generation 2 Pokemon. Like it's not the strongest Gen 2 Pokemon, but at least it is a Gen 2 Pokemon that is a Psychic type. So yeah, it should be on Will's team. But on no planet should Will, the first Elite Four member, have two Zatus. Especially when there are several other psychic types that were not used anywhere else that are not used here in favor of a second Zatu. He shouldn't use a Slowbro when Slow King is available. Jinx is fine enough, I guess. It at least evolves from a Johto Pokemon. But Jinx and Slowbro were both also on Lorelai's team, who was the first gym leader from Kanto. So if you go straight from a Kanto game into a Johto game and you're fighting the first Elite Four member, you'll see a Slowbro and Jinx, and just, I feel like that's just a little monotonous. Like I said, I do like Exeggutor. Is, a very powerful psychic type that didn't really get much use anywhere else in this region or even the previous game outside of sometimes on Blue's team. But having the two Xatu with no Slow King, no Girafarig, no Wobbuffet if you wanted to go crazy with that, no Espeon, it just feels like the one time they actually do use Johto Pokemon, they use two of them in the place of another Johto Pokemon. Especially since Xatu just doesn't feel like a ace material in the slightest. Slowking definitely would, Espeon definitely would, but not Xatu. Definitely not Xatu. Um, so yeah, like it has three Pokemon from Kanto, and then the two Pokemon from Johto are repeats of kind of underwhelming Pokemon. I said before that I'm more or less okay with repeats, either across one team or across several different teams, if those Pokemon can do something radically different. Either like one can be a special attacker, one can be a physical attacker, one can be like more of a defensive tank, where other one's more of an like attacker. Like I feel like if two Pokemon can do different things, they can more or less exist on a team or two different teams fine enough as long as they serve a different purpose. But these Zatu could do the exact same thing because they're both Zatu in Generation 2, and their move pool was very limited. Even in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, their movesets aren't that different. I think one might know Confuse Ray, the other doesn't, but that's not really enough. If it was, heaven forbid, two Gengar, like, for example, a Ghost Trainer or two Gengar, and one Gengar was specifically like a Hypnosis Dream Eater curse set or nightmare or whatever, just it's just there just to put you to sleep and then over time wear you down. And the other one is more of a just all out special attacker. That could be something. That could be reason enough to want to have two of the same Pokemon on the same team. But two Zatu, they just don't make sense to me. And I will never, in my head, it will never make sense to have Will's ace be a Zatu. I have, I just, especially in the Heart Gold Soul Silver post game rematches, where his entire team is absolutely incredible. He has like a Bronzong, a Gardevoir, like even Grumpig, I think is pretty cool there. And then you end it with a Zatu. It just feels like another one of his Pokemon. You're like, oh, I already fought his ace. And no, it was that Zatu. Whereas all the other Elite Four members, their teams are radically changed to have their aces feel very impactful. And his is just a Zatu. So, with all that being said, I firmly believe that Will is the number one. I said worst, but I'll be generous and just say my least favorite trainer team of all time. So, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below if there are any Pokemon trainer teams that you just really do not like that I didn't mention here. Let me know if you disagree with any of my choices. Let me know if you want me to do a top whatever favorite teams, because there are a lot of teams that I think, even improve on teams I don't like. There are a lot of teams that are very impressive, just either do really cool combos or um just fit their theme and their personality very well. Even if they're not like the strongest, they just feel very memorable because of that. So yeah, let me know all of that down below. I would love to have a discussion going. It's been one of my all-time favorite things as after these videos released to go into the comments and just talk with people about and just discuss just things about my videos. And I've gained a lot of insight about things I would want to, either change or have or gain ideas for future videos down there. So, please let me know all of your thoughts down below. It really helps me, and I really hope I really just like having this outlet to talk about Pokemon. I apologize that this video is completely negative. I usually like to have some kind of positive spin to it, be like, I don't like this, but here is how I would fix it. And, I think this would be an overall, improvement. Whereas here it was just, these are all bad. So, like I said, if you would want me to do a top favorite uh trainer list, please let me know and I will be more than happy to get to work on that. Um, so yeah, with all of that, I will see you all next time.